Over the years, there have been many westerns that, despite being genuinely great, have never quite received the attention or credit that they truly deserve. So today, I thought it was about time that we take a look at 10 of the most underrated western movies ever made. So starting us off at number 10, we have Appaloosa, a 2008 western starring Viggo Mortensen and Ed Harris, who actually co-wrote and directed the movie as well. And this all came about because of his love for the Robert B. Parker novel of the same name, which the movie's actually based on. And much like the novel, the film follows two hired guns, Virgil Cole and Everett Hitch, who agree to police a small town in 1882 New Mexico following deadly attacks from a gang led by a powerful rancher played by Jeremy Irons. But bringing him to justice proves a lot harder than they first expected, especially when Virgil becomes romantically involved with a mysterious widow who arrives in town around the same time as them. However, more so than the story, what really makes this movie are the performances from its star-studded cast. In particular, Harris and Mortensen have an excellent chemistry on screen, thanks in large part to the quality of the screenplay. Now admittedly, the pacing of the film probably could have done with tightening up, but the idea that Appaloosa was widely dismissed for being too much of a traditional throwback western seems kind of ridiculous in hindsight, especially given that that was clearly what Ed Harris was trying to accomplish, which he most certainly does. Next, at number 9, we have The Tall T, a 1957 western directed by Bud Bowditcher, best known for directing multiple low-budget westerns in the late 50s, which more often than not starred leading man Randolph Scott. And that was exactly the case with The Tall T, which follows an aging cowboy who becomes an unlikely hero when his stagecoach is hijacked by a trio of outlaws who plan to ransom a wealthy heiress who's travelling on board. Now that might not sound all that groundbreaking narratively, but for a self-proclaimed B-movie, The Tall T actually has a surprising amount of depth, with lots of nuanced characters, moral complexities, and a really effective examination of the blurred lines between good and evil, long before spaghetti westerns made it a trend. So if you've not seen The Tall T, it's definitely a hidden gem from that era of westerns that really doesn't get the acknowledgement that it deserves. At number 8, we have The Salvation, a western released back in 2014 with a cast that included Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Eva Green, and the always impeccable Mads Mikkelsen. And in the film he plays a Danish war veteran who emigrates to America with his family only for them to be murdered by criminals. So he understandably takes his revenge on the killers, not knowing that it will put him directly in the crosshairs of a far more dangerous villain, who rules over a nearby frontier town and its terrified inhabitants. So again, the plot might not seem all that innovative, but its style certainly is, given that it's actually a Danish film full of European talent both in front and behind the camera, which gives The Salvation a very unique tone that feels indebted to Sergio Leone, given its widescreen visuals, distinct score, and gritty violence. It also features a really overlooked performance from Mads Mikkelsen, which makes it all the more tragic that The Salvation never seemed to find a larger audience. About. So at number 6, we have Hombre, a 1967 western based on a book of the same name, written by Elmore Leonard, who famously created the character of Raylan Givens in Justified. And in this adaptation, Butch Cassidy himself, Paul Newman, plays the character of John Russell, a man raised by the Apache who has to return to civilized society in Arizona, where he's immediately subject to racism and prejudice, all because of his upbringing. But when the stagecoach he's travelling on is suddenly attacked, all those who previously shunned him suddenly turn to him to save their lives. And what follows is a tense tale of survival and justice, full of memorable villains and hard-hitting themes, all held together by a standout performance from Paul Newman, which is very unlike the many other roles that he's most known for, but in the best possible way. So if you've never seen or heard of the movie, it's well worth checking out. Next up, we have Quigley Down Under, a 1990 western that famously starred Alan Rickman and Tom Selleck. And here he plays an American sharpshooter hired to work in the Australian outback. But when the dark motives of his employer become clear, he decides to turn against him and use his skills as a marksman to become an unlikely hero to the local indigenous people. Now you'd think with such a famous cast and unique setting that the movie would have made quite an impact upon its release, but instead it was met with overwhelmingly negative reviews from critics. But I can only imagine that this was because they took the film far too seriously, as Quigley Down Under is very clearly meant to be a fun, charming, action-packed romp, featuring an undeniably charismatic performance from Tom Selleck. So if you're looking for that distinct 90s brand of popcorn escapism, you really can't go wrong with this western, regardless of what the reviews say. At number 4, we have Dead Man, a 1995 psychedelic western that starred Johnny Depp in one of his earlier, lesser-known roles before he became a household name. And in the movie, he plays William Blake, an accountant who accidentally commits murder and is forced to go on the run, at which point he meets a strange North American man called Nobody, who takes Blake under his wing and leads him on a journey of spiritual self-discovery. And if that sounds all a bit surreal, it's probably because it is, as Dead Man feels very much like a western directed by Tim Burton, shot entirely in black and white, with mind-bending sequences and a completely improvised score from Neil Young, not to mention a typically committed performance from Johnny Depp. But despite Dead Man probably being one of the most original and unconventional westerns of all time, featuring one of the most well-known actors around, somehow the movie continues to go largely overlooked, and probably always will do, just because of how weird it is. So up next, we have Slow West, a movie from 2015 that starred Michael Fassbender and Cody Smith-McPhee. Set in the final days of the Wild West, the movie centres on an unlikely hero called Jay, a young Scotsman travelling across the frontier in pursuit of his love. But it doesn't take long for him to run into trouble, at which point a mysterious and hardened drifter steps in to rescue him and agrees to aid him on his quest. And this results in a totally unique coming-of-age tale, full of dark humour and unexpected twists, grounded by two strong performances from its leads who have an excellent chemistry on screen. However, what the movie really deserves recognition for is its cinematography, that delivers one of the most striking and surreal depictions of the American West that you're ever likely to see. Yet it would seem that the movie passed most people by, which is surprising given that it's actually an A24 film, and considering its cast and overall quality, you'd probably expect it to be a lot more famous than it is. At number 2, we have Bone Tomahawk, another 2015 release, this time a horror western starring Kurt Russell. And on this occasion, he plays Sheriff Franklin Hunt, a tough-as-nails sheriff who rides out with a ragtag posse on a mission to rescue a kidnapped wife from a group of terrifying cave-dwelling cannibals. It was difficult to decide whether to include this movie or not, given that anyone who's seen Bone Tomahawk will always either passionately recommend it or warn you against it, so there's no debating that it has made an impact. However, given its genre mashup B-movie status, the movie looks like it'll probably end up just being a cult classic rather than ever breaking into the mainstream, especially in regards to its place within the Western genre. Because if you put its horrifying, gory elements aside, Bone Tomahawk really does deserve recognition as a remarkable western as well, from its unforgettable characters to its skillful direction, all shot in around 20 days on a budget of just $2 million. So I still think Bone Tomahawk deserves more credit than it actually gets, and I'd highly recommend you check it out, but only if you have the stomach for it. So finally, at number 1, we have The Great Silence, a 1968 spaghetti western directed by Sergio Corbucci. And refreshingly, the film actually has a snowy setting, given that it's set during the Great Blizzard in 1899 Utah, and centers around a mute gunslinger fighting on behalf of a group of outlaws, who've become the unfortunate target of a bloodthirsty bounty hunter. So as you can probably guess, the whole film is very morally grey, featuring lots of complex anti-heroes and brutal violence, as well as beautiful cinematography and even a score composed by the great Ennio Morricone. Yet despite The Great Silence offering so much on every level, any mention of it being an all-time classic is often snuffed out by it being compared to equally perfect, more well-known spaghetti westerns that came out around that time. Even its director, Sergio Corbucci, rarely got much credit for the movie, given that he's generally better known for directing Django, which is arguably a far less impressive and ambitious film than The Great Silence. And it really is a massive shame, because the movie genuinely is a masterpiece, and until that becomes more common knowledge, I think The Great Silence deserves the top spot as the most underrated western of all time. But of course, there will be others that I didn't mention, so let me know your suggestions below, and if there are enough good ones, I'll try to do a follow-up video of the top 10 as voted by you guys. And while you're here, you might also want to check out this video right here.